afternoon. Welcome to Sociology 1 here at Yuba College. I do have an announcement I want the people at home to know about if you're watching today, and hopefully you are, and that you in here are aware of. I'm not sure if I mentioned it. An extra credit opportunity today at 6 o'clock in room 716 here on Yuba College. It might be in room 724, but they're right next to each other. So one of those rooms, and that's over here next to the baseball fields. It's to watch the presidential debate, and you can earn extra credit in here by not only coming to the event, but then turning in a one-page paper that talks about the debates and tries to use a term or two or three from this class in discussing the debate. And I'm sure the debates are going to cover a lot of terms and ideas that we covered our first several weeks here in Sociology 1. And then you can also get free pizza, so that's another good reason to come. So I'm really encouraging you to come to the debates tonight over at room 716 on the Yuba College campus. And that goes for you at home too. You can always email me your paper about the debates. Also, if you're not able to go to the debate watching party, I would take extra credit essays about the debate. You can still write an essay about the debate. So I guess I'll give, if you do come, your paper won't have to be as long. Let's put it that way. If you come, your paper could only be like a half page long. And if you don't come, I'll expect at least a page. Is that fair? That way some of you will get credit just for coming. But you have to still write the paper to get the credit. All right, and then we're going to hand back the papers and exams. You at home, you have until Wednesday to go ahead and come in and take the exam and turn in your paper along with that. You're not going to get any help by listening to us hand back our papers, but that's what we're doing for the next few minutes here. And I don't have a good way to hand back your paper and exam, so we're going to have to do two handbacks, I guess, here. But I should have gotten them all into order, but I didn't do that. And here's how the scoring works. So on here, it's going to give you the number that you got correct, and then the slash is the percentage. The percentage doesn't really matter for your grade. What I want you to do is multiply the number you got right by 3. So in other words, each question on here out of 25 questions, each was worth 3 points. So this test was worth 75 points. This paper was worth 25. So that means your paper came out to a quarter of your test grade. I think at one point I said it would be 20%, but really you should be happy because I really didn't take very many points off even on like the worst of these. So making this count for more than 20% probably helped your grade in almost every case. But people missed a lot more on these than they did on here. So you should be happy if this counted for more weight. All right, Eric Contreras. So what you need to do is add together. Multiply this one by 3. Then you're going to get your paper score back, and you add that to this total. And that's your total. And then the scoring just works like most scoring does. If you're in the 90s, you're getting an A. If you're in the 80s, it's a B. If you're in the 70s, it's a C. If you're below 70, you're in the D and F territory, and that's not good. Okay, Andrew Neville. Ryan Miramontes. No? Destiny Desai. Kayla Salcedo. These ones, another thing. Here's another little thing I forgot to mention. These say +3 at the bottom. That's another little thing you're going to be excited about. The score you got on here, you're really one answer more. So you can add 3 to your score. Sorry. That was because I realized after they were all scored and I started putting them into my scoring that on my key, one of the ones was wrong. I actually ended up using you had most of them right when you turned it in, so I ended up changing the ones that were wrong to right and then using yours as my key. But I made a mistake, and so one of them was marked wrong on everybody that should have been marked right. But in my scorebook, rest assured, I already added the 3 to your score. So the best way to do it is the number right, add 1 to that, and then multiply it by 3. Raymond Chauhan. Sarah Comarsh. Kent Pond. Juan Mendoza. Thomas Mang. Todd and Desi. Joel Povoy. Crystal Diaz. Janet Vasquez. Patricia Gonzalez.
No, it's 23.
Anna Kumar.
With the actual or without?
Riley Monday. Alexis, I think it was here. Manuel Castellanos. Cindy Kine. Justin Forrester. Miriam Rodriguez. Yadira Casillas. Oh, there was another thing I forgot to mention. I'll mention it in a second. Manuel Aguirre. Manuel Aguirre. Holly Sutherfield.
That's 75%. Yes.
Christian Valdez.
So that's all we're saying. Even if you get 1%, it's like 5%.
Alyssa Rivas. Vivian Mua. Vivian Mua. Manmeet Singh. Ana Yeli Ortiz. Darren Wheat.
What if that's it will be 70%.
Brian Normani. Everybody got there?
No.
Oh, Gerlene Cord. Peggy Perkins. Who didn't get there? What's the name?
Ray Sean.
All right, is that everybody? All right, papers, you probably want to get those back, I'm assuming. But there was a few people that didn't turn in papers. Well, Yajihira Casilla, Vivian Mua, Alyssa Rivas, I don't have papers for you guys. So if you don't have a paper, you might want to talk to me after. All right, hand back these papers. Peggy Perkins, Juan Mendoza, Crystal Diaz. I already forgot your name, so you'll need to raise again. Janet Vasquez, Patricia Gonzalez, Anna Kumar, Charlie Ford, Riley Monday, Alexis Melchior, Manuel Castellanos, Cindy Kine, Justin Forrester, Manmeet Singh, Miriam Rodriguez, Manuel Aguirre, Holly Sutherfield, Christian Valdez, Ana Yeli. Nope. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, there. Sorry. There was somebody. General. Eric Contreras. Eric Contreras. Andrew Neville.
Here.
And I'll explain how I graded these in a second, I guess. Probably want to know that. All right. I think that's everybody. Somebody not getting. Where did it go then? Oh, some got stuck over here. Tyler Rowland. Darren Weeks. Cowboy. Desi. Yang. Han. Chauhan. All right, two main reasons I would have taken points off these. It's destiny. Oh, still keep somehow not getting them all. I don't know why I'm so discombobulated today. What about Kayla Saucedo? Sorry. Two main reasons I took points off were, one was if I wasn't really clear what question you were answering. There was two questions that were clearly distinct from each other. And if it wasn't clear to me which question you were answering, then your paper wasn't really clearly answering the question. A second reason I took points off is a lot of people chose that first question, which social problems in the movie are related to mass unemployment? And a lot of you kind of gave me the opposite answer. In other words, I was asking about when people lose their jobs. So unemployment, you lose your job, you don't have to write all this down. I just want to make it clear in your minds because for some of you, I guess it wasn't clear. And maybe visualizing it will make it more clear. When people lose their job, if you lose your job, that's unemployment, right? But mass unemployment, that's what I asked about. That's when lots of people lose their jobs at the same time. And it wasn't that the city of Milwaukee got hit with hard times, as some of you said, like, oh, they just started having unemployment. We were trying to illustrate the conflict theory idea that globalization, this new change in our economy, restructuring of our economy, is what led to lots of people losing their jobs, factory closings. And it wasn't just layoff. It was you're closed and you're fired. So factory closings. But then the issue was, how does that affect the community? When I said social problems, I didn't just mean those two families. What problems did those two families have? What I was trying to get you to think about was, if we multiply their problems by thousands of families in one city like Milwaukee, that community, how's that community affected? And so when lots of people lose their jobs, it was talking in the movie, they talked about things like, well, unsupervised children. When people lose their jobs, they have to work more hours to try and make up the money. And so they end up working weird hours, or both parents working, and so they end up with unsupervised children. And unsupervised children ended up with things like school problems, kids not getting their homework done, or street crime and things like that. And so some of you talked more about, oh, they had unemployment and therefore these families had problems, like Claude got sick, or Tony got sick, or so you only talked about those two families and the problems they experienced. That showed me that you watched the movie, but it didn't show me that you were taking it to the next sociological step. Remember, sociology looks at aggregate behavior, social facts. So we're not interested that much in just two families and what happened to them. We were looking at those two families to try and understand how has America itself been affected by globalization. So if we can look at how a community like Milwaukee has suffered, we can begin to understand the effects of globalization on our society, on our everyday life. And so that's what I was asking in that first question. And aside from school problems and street crime, you could talk about things like health problems and gangs and things. I guess that goes to street crime. People having marital problems. They had them, but lots of families doing that. If lots of families are divorcing, lots of kids are ending up with not two parents at home. So it's really, the idea was that you were talking about how the community, how Milwaukee was affected, and the larger community, not just those two families. So those were two big reasons I took off. And if it just wasn't clear that you really watched the video, then I might have taken points off. And if you just weren't very specific in how you were illustrating your points, if you just said, well, they were struggling because they were unemployed. Well, how? We saw a whole video on their struggles. So which ones were they? So not being specific enough. So those were some of the main reasons. If you don't think you were scored correctly, if you think you deserve a higher grade for whatever reason, you can always come talk to me about that. I'm not interested in ruining people's careers, and I'm interested in letting you make a case for yourself. If you can explain why the answer you gave, did show your knowledge and I just missed something or I wasn't fair, then we can talk about that. But all right, any questions then on the exam and the paper? Yeah.
Any chance of going over what your brain?
Oh, I do kind of want to do that. Should we do that? It's only 25 questions, so I think we can quickly do that. And maybe it'll help. I didn't think about doing that, but I kind of did, but we do need to move on. But I was kind of surprised at how many questions people missed. And so that made me worry as a teacher. Maybe I didn't do the best job.
Aren't they going to see it?
Oh, the people at home? Yeah, good point. We could tell him to pause it while I do this, huh?
I haven't taken the exam yet.
And you haven't taken the exam, thank you. All right, I'm going to ask then, if you want to know the answers, you come and talk to me. I have it, and you can look at the answers. You can look at the exam and try to see what the right answer is. I think, if I hand corrected yours, in some cases I did, then I circled the correct answer. If I didn't, Scantron machines don't do that, but anyway, yeah, I did kind of want to go over it again, but I guess we can't really do that. So we're not going to. We do need to move on, though. But I was surprised at how I thought this was an easy, straightforward test that just basically asked you to regurgitate what I had taught. So I was, regurgitate meaning vomit it back up. So I wasn't sure if you, why that didn't happen. But I kind of, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I sense that people who, maybe English isn't your first language, if it's not your first language, then sometimes understanding me might be a problem. Because I tend to, I don't know, I'm very English oriented. And so maybe I'm not as clear to you. And in those cases, if you think you're capable of understanding sociology, but you're not understanding how I present it, then we need to find a way either for you to get more help from me in extra credit, or maybe me giving you the notes first would help. I don't know, but we need to talk about that if that's your issue. All right, any other questions about the exam?
How was the graded between the essay and the test itself?
So the test counts for 75 points. If you total each, there's 25 questions, each worth 3 points. So 100% would be 75 points on the test and 25 on the paper. So you add your paper and your test score together, and that gives you a score out of 100, and then it's just a straight percentage thing. So 90 is A, 80 or better is B, or 80 to 90 is B, 80, 89. Got it? All right? We clear? All right, let's move on. And I'll fix my sunglasses later. We are now talking about functionalism. Again, just to give you guideposts as to where we've been and where we're going, we've learned about what is sociology overall, and we got introduced to the three main perspectives. But then we took a deeper dive into conflict theory. And that's what you just got tested on, was what is sociology and a deeper understanding of conflict theory. Now we're going deeper into functionalism. And we're going to learn much more about what that perspective is all about. And so it's a good idea to kind of contrast functionalism with conflict theory. We saw that conflict theory was all about conflict and change. It was trying to understand why society isn't all on the same page, how people have conflicts over things like wealth and class and power. And then as we saw, conflict theory really wants to understand how did we get from being hunting and gathering people way back when to being advanced capitalist global people now, I mean, that's a lot of change. And how did that change happen? And then even within capitalism, we wanted to know, like, why didn't capitalism fall apart? What saved capitalism? Then what happened after that? Then what happened to globalization? And so we were all about change. And these families we looked at over 20 years, all the changes that happened to them. So conflict theory, you can say over here to the side, that conflict theory is really all about conflict and social change. And functionalism, if it's in some ways the opposite of conflict theory, it's the opposite. Its concerns are kind of the opposite of this. It's more about social solidarity, people getting along, people working together, people being on the same page and functioning harmoniously together. And rather than change, functionalists are more interested in social stability. Social order, it's called. Keeping things orderly and stable and in control. So functionalists in many ways are the opposite of conflict theorists in that they're, focusing on the times, not the opposite of conflict, the times when people are not in conflict, when they're in harmony together. And the time when society isn't rapidly changing, when it's basically staying the same and everything's functioning smoothly. And so for a functionalist, that's sort of the normal state of society. Conflict and change happen, but from a functionalist standpoint, those are the not normal times. Those are the strange times. Normally, things should be running together smoothly and people being on the same page from a functionalist standpoint. And so they're less interested in why we have conflict and what those conflicts are about and where society might be headed in the future. That's what conflict theory was all about. Functionalists are more trying to figure out how can we keep things, make people feel together and on the same page. And how can we keep people from wanting to, change their society drastically or overthrow it or protest against it. And, just to put things in terms of today's debate, you could say in some ways, Trump is the conflict theorist in the debate and he wants change and he wants to rattle things up and shake things up and overturn things. And in some ways, Clinton is more the keep things how they are. We already have a Democrat in office, and she was part of that administration, and she wants to keep things going how they've been. And so you could see the two sides as, in those terms. But they're not sociologists, they're politicians. And we're talking about sociologists, so we don't want to take the analogy too far. But, and in any case, most conflict theorists wouldn't agree with Donald Trump about anything. So it's a stretch to call him a conflict theorist. But, anyway, I shouldn't have said that. So forget I just said all that. Anyway, moving on. So what is social solidarity? How do we create it? And what do groups that have social solidarity, if we can compare different groups on how solid they are, and any group can have solidarity. You can have two people that have solidarity. You could have a family that has it or doesn't have it, a classroom that has solidarity or doesn't, a sports team, a town, a country, a globe. I mean, anytime you have human beings together, the question is, are they really a group, or are they separate individuals or separate people that are against each other or aren't really together? And so what is it that makes a group feel like a group, that makes us feel like we're connected? You guys aren't that much of a group. You're basically just a collection of individuals that happen to have chosen to take this class at the same time. So I don't think you really feel like I'm so connected to those people in Soc 1. I can't wait to see them again. Can't wait to see them. I can't wait for Wednesday because I get to see my Soc 1 homies again. I don't know if you feel that way. We could maybe get to that point where we felt that way about each other. And just because you're in a group doesn't mean you love the other people always. I mean, think of families, for example. But there's certain things that we would say a group has that makes it a group. And we could say that they are shared things. I mean, that's what makes them as a group, is that they share things. But what are some of the things that a group has to share that you think would make them be a group? I mean, like if you think of teams, for example, some teams really work well together and have a lot of solidarity. Some teams are really divided and aren't working well together. What do the teams that are working well together with solidarity, what do they share in common?
Ideas.
Ideas like what? I mean,
Anything
agree to a subject or something?
Well, if we have the same beliefs, for example, and attitudes, if we all think like it's important to go to school or something, or we all think God is, a bearded guy that's upstairs and he watches out for us. If we all have that image in our mind and believe in God in the same way, then we could feel connected to each other. If your image of God is that she's a woman with red hair and, lives underwater, and my image of God is that he's a white guy with a long beard, then we might have different beliefs about God and we might not feel very connected. But if we have the same beliefs, yeah, that can help. Ideas, what else? Well, another thing sociologists point to that we don't always use this term in everyday life, but values. If we think the same things are important, like if you think going to college is an important thing, maybe we have something in common there. If you think equality is valuable and people should be equal, or you don't. If you think some people are just better than others, that would be another belief or value. You value non-equality, where some people get to have much more than us. Anyway, what people value, if they value the same things, you could say they're in the group. A team, if the team values winning, and they all say it's really important that our team wins, and we all value that, then we might be better off than if my main value is so I can get really good statistics. I really value wanting to have the most interceptions of all the players in the league. If that's my main goal, then I might not care if my team wins. I just want to make sure I get interceptions. And that would be a value that might be in conflict with the rest of your team, so that might be a problem. But if the whole team says we want to win and that's our main thing we value and we don't care about our individual statistics, then we might do better as a team. But values, symbols are another important thing. Do we share the same symbols in terms of, like on a team, the same colors we're wearing, the same 49er, dusty 49er. We know we're all playing for Yuba College if we've all got a dusty 49er on our hat. Or we all know we're Americans if when we see that red, white, and blue thing, we all feel like we just want to put our hand over our heart and stand up. Or some of us want to kneel down, I guess. But even those people that want to kneel down, when they see the flag, they too are saying, I value American freedom and the freedom of speech, and I'm expressing that so it's a shared value, you could say, but we're discussing that. How much do we value the symbol of standing during the national anthem? Anyway, these are common things that sociologists point to, that when people share these things in common, they may feel more or less like a group. One of the most important things is rules. If we share the same rules, and we agree that they're important rules, then we begin to feel like we're on the same page. And I would say this classroom, we don't have a lot in common, but one thing that shows me you've started to think of yourself as a group is you kind of set rules about where you sit. No one wrote it down, no one made a seating chart, but you always sit in the same spot pretty much. And that's a rule that you've sort of made. And that's one thing groups do, is the more people spend time together, the more they start saying, well, here's how we should do things, and here's what we expect. If you're going to be with us in this group, here's how we expect you to act. You're supposed to sit here. And that's a pretty easy rule to follow, and people are following it. But the more time we spent together and the more we shared in terms of, another things we could put here is, time together and space. Do we share the same space? These are other things groups might share, and the more that you share those things, the more you would begin to operate like a group and start to have to deal with things groups have to deal with, like, well, what are the rules of our group? And what's going to be okay? And what's not okay? And what do we do to somebody when they don't follow them? And those kinds of questions. So functionalists, I think it's a good idea to maybe start with rules as the sort of basis of group life. It's one of the first things that really distinguishes a group from a bunch of individual people that aren't connected, is that they're starting to make rules, just like you guys have had. You don't necessarily have a whole lot of shared values and symbols. We don't have like a little logo for Soch 1 at 2 o'clock, but you do have a little rule you follow. And so rules, sociologists refer to as norms. And so I want to begin to think about norms here. We call them norms because rule is a little too specific for what we're talking about. And sociologists say all groups, if they're groups, begin to have sort of expectations, social expectations, group expectations meaning expectations of how the individual is supposed to act in that group. And so at the most general level, when we say norms, that's what we're talking about. Can you give an example of a group expectation that maybe isn't specific to this group in here, but let's say Yuba College group expectation? If you are a student at Yuba College, are there certain expectations of how you're supposed to act as soon as you set foot on the Yuba College community environment? And interestingly enough, that community, as we're sitting here talking to some of them, it doesn't have to be physically here on the Yuba College campus. You could be, participating in the community while you're over there or online or, So, but what would be an example of an expectation that you have to live up to as a Yuba College?
Doing your work.
You just did one.
Somewhat studious.
Well, you're supposed to act like a student, so you're pointing out things like you're supposed to have a serious attitude towards work, and if you're going to enroll in classes, you're supposed to do what the professor says. You raise your hand. I never had a rule in the syllabus that says before students can speak in this class, they must raise their hands. But you followed that rule. It's a generally accepted norm of classrooms, is that when the professor asks a question, you don't just blurt out a response, you raise your hand. So those are examples of group expectations. You are all wearing clothes, I notice. I considered not this morning, but I wore them, thankfully. You're probably thankful about that. So, but I even said to him, because I'm holding this debate later, I'm like, is this good attire for a debate? And she's like, no. So anyway, you're supposed to wear clothes, and you all did that. So that's a group expectation. It happens to be a group expectation of American citizens. You're not supposed to leave your house. Anyway, so group expectations, but we want to get a little more specific than that. And sociologists point out that there's a broad distinction to be made between informal and formal types of group expectations, or informal norms and formal norms. Informal norms, the general name for them are folkways. And formal norms, the general name for them is mores, M-O-R-E-S. I'm trying to put little quotes around these. Now, more, that word might remind you of morality. They have the same root. So this is referring to morality, or, that's what you can think of when you think of mores. Folkways is referring to people. Folk means the people in German. And so these are the ways of the people. So hopefully you're beginning to get a sense that one is more formalized and more, rigid. And the other one is more how people do things. But what are we talking about here? What would be an example of a formal norm, or what would be an example of an informal norm? And how do we know that one is informal or formal? What makes them formal or informal? Well, I'll just give you a name of one kind of formal norm. Laws, for example. The Constitution is an example of a set of formal norms. The California Criminal Code is an example. Those set out the laws of California. So that's a type of formal norm. What would be an example of an informal norm then? Does anyone? I'll just give you one we've already talked about. Where you sit right now is an informal thing. So I'll just give that as an example, like where we sit in class. I'm not going to write that up. But so what would be the difference between, say, a law that says, for example, you must wear clothes, you must be attired, you must not be indecent, you must not expose yourself in an indecent way in public. That's a law. I don't know how they state the law, but how is that different than, say, the rule that says you're supposed to sit here when you come to Social 1?
One's more like you choose, and then the other one's enforced.
I don't know. What happens if he chose not to sit there? What if he sat right there. Would it not be enforced? Nobody would say anything? Maybe not. Maybe that one, but I don't know if, I'm sure we can think of, and we're going to get to it, informal norms that really are enforced, but the question is, enforced by who? Enforced how? And so it's not really just a question of one's enforced and one's not, and it isn't really just a question of choice or not. So we need something a little more than that. Because you have a choice of whether to follow the laws. I can smoke marijuana if I want to. I might get arrested, but a lot of people are very happy to break the laws. Have you ever gone over 55? Because I have. It's a choice. It's not like you can't go over 55. I certainly can. Sammy Hagar can't drive 55, he said. I don't know if you remember that song. You guys are too young for that.
Consequences aren't so bad, though.
Not so bad. That's another one I want to challenge here. Because I'll give you, but I think we need to first think of what is it that makes it informal or formal. I'll take one. There's a norm that says you're supposed to cover your mouth when you sneeze. And it is enforced. Why don't you try sneezing on Holly without covering your mouth? Why don't you blow some boogers all over Holly's neck? And see if Holly is okay with that. She's okay with it. You guys are good friends. Why don't you try it? I don't know. Maybe you guys are good friends too. Informal norms are enforced. It's just a question of who are they enforced by, and sometimes the penalties are extremely severe. But that's not what makes them informal or formal. What do you think is the difference between?
I think formal is more like vocalized and directly defined, while informal is more of kind of like an unspoken expectation or like tradition.
You're getting there. Formal usually means written down. One thing that makes it formal is somebody wrote it down. Laws aren't just things you hear about. Hey, it's a good idea not to smoke pot. It's written down in the California code. California is about to change its code maybe, depending on how people vote in November. But the United States Code is very clear. Marijuana is illegal. It's a Schedule I drug. You will be put in jail for being caught with it. So it's written down. The one about where you sit, that's not written down. I didn't make a seating chart. It doesn't say in my syllabus you must sit in a certain seat assigned by the instructor. It's just, how did you know where to sit? How do you know where to sit every day?
We created that rule.
And you probably tell each other with like eye movements, or you just did it, your memory is in there. But if you sat in the wrong seat, somebody might look at you. I don't know if they'd really get that upset. They might just go and then sit somewhere else. But you might get a little irritated if somebody was in your seat.
It becomes part of a routine that you do every day.
Yeah, the seating. But informal norms, like how did you know you were supposed to raise your hand? I didn't write that down either in the syllabus. So in other words, informal norms tend to be passed oral. They are orally transmitted, meaning people tell you. Through informal interaction, you learn from other people. Hey, we're supposed to raise our hand. I'll tell you about, who tells me that you're supposed to cover your mouth when you sneeze? How do you know that one? Your parents? I hope your parents taught you that. But you know who taught me how to cover my mouth? My children. Because I used to do it like this. That's how my mom taught me. And my daughters told me, Dad, you're covering your mouth wrong. It's like this,
Dad.
So, Dad. So they've learned in school that you cover your mouth like this. And they're telling me, this isn't the right way. Your snot's going to fly this way, Dad. You got to cover. They told us in school. So in other words, there's no law that says I have to cover my mouth when I sneeze. If I want, I can blow snot on my kids if I want. Or you, if I want. There's no law against it. But there is a lot of informal enforcement. There is a lot of oral transmission of the rule of people telling each other, hey, cover your mouth when you sneeze. Hey, that's gross. Hey, that's disgusting, you snot-blowing snothead. And so people generally do cover their mouth when they sneeze. But it's not because there's a law against it. It's not because it's written down and you're going to get punished. It's because it was told to you. And that raises the other question. So one big difference between mores and folkways is mores are written down. laws are like that, like formal laws of a city or a county or a state. But the laws in this classroom are like that. We have some informal laws, like where you sit, and then we have formal things like I just gave you about the test. The test is worth this much of your grade, and it was written in the syllabus, and you get this much. And so the things that are written in the syllabus are more formalized rules that you have to pay attention to. And you would probably get mad if I suddenly said, oh, by the way, this test, I just decided after you guys took it that it's 100% of your grade. So whatever you got on it, that's your grade for the class. You'd probably be pissed. You'd be like, that wasn't in the syllabus. You didn't write that down. So you can't just be informal about things like, what your grade's based on. I have to be formal about it and write it down. So writing it down is one thing that makes it formal. What else makes it formal? Well, let's take the question of, what else makes it formal, do you think? Or the difference between formal and informal?
Like the person that says like the rule or the law, like how much tolerance.
Well, so these are authorities. Well, it's not always who says the law, because who made the law that says you can't smoke marijuana, for example? You could say, well, it's a long story how that happened. But in a democratic society, you could say it's the people that made that law because we elected the officials who passed the law, and it was Congress that passed the law, but we elected Congress. So the American people made the law, you could say, that doesn't allow marijuana smoking. So it's not so much who made the law, but what happens if you smoke pot versus what happens if you sit in the wrong seat. In other words, it comes to the question of enforcement. Some of you are bringing up the issue of enforcement. So what's the difference between who enforces it if you sit in the wrong seat? Peers do. In other words, so this is enforced by officials, by official authorities in some way, as you're saying. And this is enforced by peers. So other people in your immediate vicinity, usually, other people that are more or less equal to you, are the ones who enforce the informal rules. So it's not. So, yeah, there's no law that says you can't blow a snot on people, as far as I know, that you can't just sneeze on people. But there's a very clear informal rule that says you're supposed to cover your mouth when you sneeze. And if you don't cover your mouth when you sneeze, what happens?
People get upset.
And? Well, yes. So therefore it is a very serious activity. Well, let me ask this. This might be a more interesting question for you to answer, and it's getting at what I'm trying to get at here. Why do we as a society put some things here and some things here? If we don't want people doing stuff, why are some things informal and not written down, and we just sort of pass it around and tell people, hey, try to cover your mouth when you sneeze? And other rules, we say, it's written down. If you smoke pot, you're going to get a $50 fine. It's an infraction in the state of California, and you could get jail time, and you're going to get this, this, and this. So why do we say for marijuana, we're writing it down, we're fining you, imprisoning you? In other words, these have what are called formal sanctions. That's what we're getting at. Sanctions means punishment. And they're formal sanctions because it's the authorities that are giving them out, like you get a $50 fine. So it's things like fines and imprisonment. This has informal sanctions. You do get punished. But who punishes you? It's peers. And what kind of punishment? Well, things like ostracism and disapproval. Well, I should put disapproval first. People saying, ew, you're gross, that's disapproval. People saying, ew, cover your mouth when you sneeze, you disgusto, that's disapproval. But the worst that could happen is that you get ostracized. You're told, you're not part of our group. You're out of the group. You're not one of us because you're not following the rules, and we don't want you here anymore. And that's the most severe punishment that a group could give to an individual, is to say, you don't get to be in our group anymore. You're not one of us. So then the question I'm asking you is why? Why would a group like this country say some things are informal, we'll keep them over here and have peers enforce those with informal sanctions, and some things we're going to put in laws, and we're going to have formal sanctions, and we're going to have fines and prison and confinement systems set up to deal with them.
Severity of consequences and the scope. So people, for instance, why the argument why they're constantly trying to get it banned is because it not only affects you, it affects the people around you, and even the architecture of places that you do it around.
Okay, so you say the thing that distinguishes the formal laws and norms from the informal is that these are about very severe behaviors. Severe, threatening behaviors.
And scope, like if it affects other people.
A lot of people. So if lots of people are harmed by this, or could be harmed by it, then we're going to make it formal. If it's not so harmful, then it's over here, less severe, less harmful, fewer people, fewer at risk, fewer people affected. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Maybe. And a lot of your textbook would say that, or a lot of textbooks would say that. But I want to challenge that view. Is it actually the case? Can you think of any examples in our law systems in America? Are there any things that we have laws against that aren't that severe, that don't really hurt that many people, that aren't really that threatening to society? And by the same token, are there any things that we allow that are legal, that actually do harm a lot of people and are very threatening to society? I mean, if you're right, yours would be the most simple answer. And I like to make a distinction between simplistic functionalism. Remember, we started this class talking about how functionalism has a tendency to be a little simplistic. Like if you say society is one big machine and all the parts are working together, that's a little simplistic. And you're leaving out the fact that people aren't always on the same page working together. There's sometimes a lot of conflict. And so simplistic functionalism versus a more complicated functionalism. And yours is the simplistic functionalist answer. It's the answer I would give my kids if my son said, "Hey Dad, why is that against the law? Why is it against the law? Why are some things illegal? And the cops will arrest me, Dad." And I might say to my son, "Well, some behaviors are really bad, son, and they can really hurt our society. And so our society doesn't want you doing those things. And if you do them, you might get arrested and put in jail. And other things aren't so bad, so we don't want you doing them. But if you do them, you might not go to jail, but people might get mad at you." Now that's the answer I might give my son. But you guys aren't 3. You guys are 23 and older, and at least 13. So you are ready for a more complicated answer to that question, and I think you're ready to even think it through and realize that that's too simplistic. Can you think of any examples of things that are illegal that aren't as harmful as other things that are legal?
What was the question?
Well, he's saying the reason some things are illegal is because they're really harmful and dangerous, and the reason some things are not illegal is because they're less harmful and dangerous. And I'm trying to complicate that picture because I don't think that's totally accurate.
No, because like smoking pot, it's not that dangerous and it's illegal.
And?
You can go to jail for it on par with like cocaine. That's kind
Right.
of
Well, so a common example that's used to make this point would be, in our society, alcohol, for example, is quite legal. Does alcohol not hurt people? Alcohol is extremely toxic. You can die by drinking a bottle of it. Marijuana is very non-toxic. They tried to figure out how much marijuana would you have to put in your body at once to die from it. And it basically is impossible to do. You need to consume like 200 pounds in a 24-hour period. And it can't be done. You'll fall asleep. I mean, you can't eat that much. There's no way to do it. It's not toxic. Your body can handle it. It doesn't kill you to put it in your body. Alcohol is a poison. You put it in your body and you put enough in too quick, your body will shut down and you'll die. So in terms of just how harmful the substance is, alcohol is a very harmful substance, but we make it fairly freely available to people. We advertise it on TV. We advertise it on billboards on the side of the road. Marijuana, for a long time, we've been throwing people in jail. That's really dangerous stuff you're using there. But it doesn't kill anyone. Also, if you think about the behaviors people do when they're drunk, I mean, we have much of our crime in this country is while people are drunk. A lot of rape, a lot of murder, a lot of fights, a lot of violence is because people are drunk. So if we think alcohol is not hurting our society, we're fooling ourselves. Anyway, and that might be one reason why the state of California, the people themselves have started to react against that formal rule and say, well, you formal authorities, you're wrong. This isn't a dangerous, terrible substance, and a lot of us are using it even though you said not to. And now we're going to change the law. So anyway, so that would be an example where I've always said, well, if it's just how harmful it is, then alcohol definitely should be illegal too. Not that be illegal. And then cigarettes do kill people every day. Cigarettes, and then ask this, well, why do people behave the way they do? Cigarettes aren't illegal yet, and yet cigarette smoking has gone way down in America from where it used to be. Marijuana still is illegal in most of America, and the use hasn't gone down by being illegal. In fact, it's gone up. So if we ask, well, why do we have things illegal? Does that keep people from doing them? Well, not really. A lot of behaviors people still do when they're illegal, and there's a lot of behaviors people will give up doing even though it's not illegal. Why do people give up cigarette smoking? Is it because of the health problems? Like we don't need to punish people because the universe will punish you and kill you by smoking? Maybe, but I'll just tell you in my own case, the reason I quit smoking was because of the informal sanctions. American people don't like smoking anymore, and they don't like smokers. And if you smoke, they will ostracize you. You can't smoke in here. Go out to the special place over there with the smokers. So all the buildings are smoke-free, and the vehicles, and so the laws have changed, but so have regular people. There's not much punishment for smoking cigarettes in violation of rules. They're told, put that out. Hey, put that out. You're not allowed to smoke in here. So it's not the formal fear of fines and imprisonment that people stop smoking cigarettes. It's getting disapproval from other people. Ew, you smoker, that cancer stick, get that cancer stick away from me. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I stopped smoking a long time ago because I wasn't afraid of dying and I knew it would kill me. But I'm like, yeah, whatever, something will kill me sometime. So I wasn't worried about death. I was worried about people right now saying, you're disgusting. And that's what got me, and specifically my child eventually. My wife got pregnant and I didn't want to be smoking around them. But the point is it's more social disapproval, and people will give you a lot of disapproval for smoking around a child. And so the point is sometimes this is the most effective. And I would, if you're going to talk about why does a society make some things formal and some things informal, is it really just a matter of severity? To some extent, you're right. I mean, murder is more dangerous than assault, and murder is more heavily punished than assault, and probably because murder is a more serious, threatening behavior than punching somebody. Yeah, but at the same time, when people really agree on something, when there's a lot of agreement in society, like the people feel this way, then you don't really need a law about it. Like, we don't need a law that says you've got to cover your mouth when you sneeze. Because everybody does it. I don't know anyone who goes around blowing snot on people when they sneeze. Everybody I know covers their mouth. And we don't have a rule that says you have to. Why do we do it? Well, we think it's gross, blowing snot on people. And we've been told enough times by other people, hey, that's gross. And we know that if you're somebody who blows snot on somebody, you will be seen as that by other people, and they'll probably ostracize you and say, don't sit next to that guy, he always sneezes on people. And you'll be like the only guy sitting alone in the corner, and everyone thinks you're a weirdo snot blower. And most of us don't want to be thought of as a weirdo. And so this desire by regular people to want to be accepted by their peers, to want to be included in the group, that keeps us in line most of the time. It keeps us putting our mouths over our noses. It keeps us from smoking cigarettes too much. It keeps us from doing a lot of things. It keeps us from leaving the house without our clothes on and stuff. Rarely do we even need a formal law. And the formal laws, that doesn't mean people want to follow them. Like I said, people are constantly breaking the speeding laws, the marijuana laws. And so, are you really afraid of a fine? Most of us feel like we're not going to get caught anyway. And if we got caught, I can do that time. They can put me in 10 years in prison. I can handle it. So we're not really that afraid of the authorities. Who we're really afraid of is other people. And other people making us feel like we're not wanted, like we're not liked, like we're not included, we're not welcome. And that really keeps us in line. So I want to suggest to you, when societies go to this, that usually means disagreement. I think when there's wide agreement on a rule, when people say, hey, it's really a shared, when it's really a shared norm, we all agree on it, then we just do it. And we can rely on each other to enforce it. When it's not a shared norm, when there's more disagreement in society, more conflict, then I think that's when laws happen. When one group wants to tell another group what to do, when one group says, hey, you guys aren't acting the right way, your group, we don't like your norms. And if you're going to be part of this group, your group better give up its norms. For example, let's take alcohol, because alcohol is legal right now. But there was a time in American history when alcohol was made illegal. And why was it made illegal? It was in the right before the 1920s, 1919, it got made illegal. There were and alcohol had been legal for many years, decades, and centuries before that. So why suddenly in 1919 did America decide, we think alcohol is bad, we should make alcohol illegal? And really, historians and sociologists have gone back and said, well, really what was going on was a lot of social conflict at the time. This was a time when a lot of immigrants were coming over to America. And they were coming over to work in the factories. Immigrants from Ireland, Italy, Germany, Southern Europe were coming over to work in the new factories of America. And the people who owned the factories tended to be white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, the original Puritan types of Mayflower people. And the people working in the factories tended to be non-white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Irish people and Italians and Germans weren't really considered white when they first came over. And anyway, there was a sense of, we white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, we're going to tell you, you Italians, you Germans, you Jews, this is your culture now and you better do it how we do it. But there was also a sense of these workers, a lot of them were organizing. I mean, if you were forming a union, remember, unions weren't illegal back then. And if you were a union organizer wanting to get workers to talk about forming a union and getting better treatment at work, where would you do that? You couldn't go to the factory to organize the workers. You had to go where the workers were after work. And where did workers gather after work? In the bars. And so a lot of union organizers were going to bars to find workers after work and say, hey, you guys, you like the pay you're getting? You getting treated well by your job? You like your boss? Well, hey, there's a better way. You can form a union. And if you guys all form a union, you could get this much better pay and stuff like that. So who didn't want bars? Factory owners. And the first laws against alcohol weren't against alcohol, they were against the saloons and the bars. And they said, we're not going to have bars in America anymore. And it was really about getting rid of a place where workers could gather after work and talk about how they're being treated. So from that perspective, the reason to illegalize alcohol wasn't because alcohol suddenly was seen as really dangerous and bad. It was a way of one group, the owners of the factories, imposing their goals on another group and saying, you can't gather in these bars. We're going to make it impossible for you. We're going to illegalize them. And that didn't work out too well because people kept drinking anyway. And a lot of drinking still happened in America, but now it was happening under organized crime situation and a much worse way because the alcohol people were drinking was like bathtub alcohol that would kill you and make you blind and stuff like that. So it didn't make America safer to get rid of alcohol. It just made alcohol be a lot more dangerous for people. And what it showed was the country was in conflict. Really, in terms of our norms, we all liked alcohol, and a lot of Americans wanted to drink it. And so trying to make it illegal wasn't really a reflection of our shared values and norms as a society. It was really one group trying to control another. And I think that's what a lot of laws are. It's when, as a parent too, or as a teacher, when the students all agree on something, like if you all agree you should sit where you're sitting, then I don't need to make a law and say, you must sit in these seats or else I'm going to punish you. You just do it anyway. And I can sit back and just know my students are going to happily sit where they're supposed to sit. But what happens, when do I feel the need to write something down? Well, if I came to the study session and it said before the study session, you need to study the material before the study session. And if I got here and you guys were all, didn't know anything yet, I might have gotten very mad and said, well, this is a conflict because I told you guys to study and it's clear you didn't study. I told you informally and that wasn't enough and you didn't listen. So now I'm writing it down, and anyone who's not ready by such and such a day, you're going to have this many points docked. In other words, things start to get written down when there's conflict, when we disagree, when we're not getting along and on the same page. And so I'm just trying to make this point that just because something's written down doesn't necessarily mean it's a really serious, threatening behavior. It usually means somebody in power wants to make sure somebody without power is doing something, and they don't want to just rely on informal agreement as the way to get things done. But in reality, informal agreement is the best way to get things done. If you're a family and you want your kids to listen to dad, if dad always has to say, you better be home by such and such an hour, or you're going to face this punishment, young lady, well, that's a really time-consuming place for dad to be in, because then I got to watch all the time what you're doing, I got to follow up, I got to punish you, I got to stay home while you're grounded. It'd be so much easier if I could just say, hey, you part of this family, you respect this family's rules, so you know what time to be home, right? I do, Dad, see you at 9. I mean, if you agree that the rule is a good rule, you're going to want to be there. You're going to want to do it. If you don't agree, if there's conflict, then I have to start being strict, writing it down, punishing you when you don't do it. So when we all agree, it's easy to all be on the same page and follow the rules. When we don't agree, then rules start getting harder and we start having to write them down and stuff like that. So, and anyway, and also I want to emphasize the idea that I've emphasized before. If we want people to behave themselves, using the law and putting strict penalties as the way to get people to behave usually doesn't work all that well. As I mentioned with binge drinking, college students, it's already illegal for them to drink, most of them. But a lot of them do it. And when we talked earlier in this class, how did colleges actually get students to stop binge drinking? By simply posting statistics around campus that tell them only 10% of students binge drink. And if that's all you say, the binge drinking tends to go down. Why? Because people want to be part of the group. They don't want to be the weirdos. They don't want to be the non-normal ones. And so people are always trying to be normal, and that's a powerful desire people have. And if societies can use that and rely on that, it works a lot better than relying on fear and fear of punishment as the way to get people to behave. So, and usually that's a sign of failure on the part of the leadership of a society. If they have to write something down, they've failed. Anyway, when people do follow the norms, obedience to social norms, the general name for that is conformity. And we've mentioned the word conformity earlier in this class. We talked about the cheerful robots that C. Wright Mills was worried about, and he was worried about people being too willing to follow the rules. Sometimes it's not a great idea to follow the rules. But when people do follow the rules, that's called conformity. When people don't follow the rules, in other words, violation of social norms, that's called deviance. Deviating from the norm. But again, we don't want to be simplistic functionalists. And simplistic functionalists simply say this: when you follow the rules, you're a conformist. When you don't follow the rules, you're a deviant. And that's a little too simplistic. Why is that too simplistic, do you think? Are you following the rules right now? Are you breaking the rules right now?
No.
Yeah, you
I
are.
mean, we are, but it's...
You're breaking a lot of rules right now, Holly. A lot of rules I was raised with anyway. What?
I'm not sitting up straight.
Your posture? We could begin with that. No, I'm just kidding. But No, people can be deviant in a variety of ways. I was just talking about like tattoos. Like I was raised, good girls don't get tattoos, but nowadays a lot of girls get tattoos. So that's not necessarily deviant. But there was a time in our culture when that's really deviant. What are you doing with tattoos? Are you a sailor? Are you in the Navy? I mean, in our country, so what is deviant? What's conform? The reason I'm trying to say this in simplistic is people aren't usually one or the other. All of us follow some rules or most rules most of the time. All of us break some rules some of the time. And it's too simplistic to act as if these are totally separate things and as if people were totally one or the other. And it's also part of this simplistic idea is that it says conformity is good. Following the rules is good. Deviance is bad. Are tattoos a bad thing?
Yeah.
I don't think so necessarily. But what we're trying to get at here is that's the simplistic thing. Again, if my 3-year-old asked me, Daddy, what are rules? Why do societies have rules? And I would say, well, the good people, or we talk a lot about good guys and bad guys, because my son keeps saying he loves Darth Vader. He calls him Dark Vader. And I'm like, Dark Vader? He's the bad guy. He's like, he's so cool looking. He loves Darth Vader. And I'm against Star Wars now, because when you think about it, they made the cute little boy, Anakin Skywalker, that my son identifies with, he grows up to be the bad guy. So anyway, Star Wars is promoting evil. Anyway, no, but what Star Wars, so he likes Darth Vader, but then we talk about, well, what's a good guy, Daddy? I'm like, you don't want to be the bad guy? He's like, yeah, I do. I'm like, no, the good guy, you want to be the good guy, don't you? And he's like, what's a bad guy? What's good guy? So if I'm explaining to a 3-year-old what a bad guy and a good guy is, I'd say, well, good guys are the guys that uphold the rules, they follow the laws. Police, he likes police too. I'm like, police get the bad guys. They arrest the bad guys and put them away in jail. You don't want to be one of the guys in jail, do you? Do they get to wear a cape and that hat that Darth Vader does? Yeah, I do. No, but he thinks he looks cool. But anyway, the point is it's too simplistic to assume that there's good guys and bad guys in a society, really. And all of us engage in some deviance. All of us engage in quite a bit of conformity. Even the guys we call the worst bad guys, the guys on death row, most of the time, in most of their life, are probably following rules. So it's not right to say they are just deviants who never follow rules, and the people who are the good people always follow the rules. There's a lot more overlap between those two categories. And also, conformity isn't always a good thing. Can you think of times when conformity is not good? C. Wright Mills said, don't be a cheerful robot. Don't just blindly conform to your society. Can you think of times when conforming wouldn't be good? Has there ever been a time when the people were asked to follow rules and those rules were not good rules to follow and it would be a good idea to break them? Can you think of any example like that? Nazi Germany, okay. So if the law says you've got to go kill this person because they don't look like you, would that be good to follow that rule? I don't think so. In this country, were there ever any laws that were bad laws, that the people who broke them were actually doing good by breaking them? Okay, well, let's talk about civil rights. So, maybe not all the way going back to slavery times, but Rosa Parks, when she said, I'm not going to stand at the back of the bus. That's a screwed up law. I'm going to sit down here because I'm tired and there's a seat open. She was breaking the law, but does that mean she's bad? Is she bad? Is she evil? And most of us nowadays would say, no, that was the morally right thing to do, is to let people sit down when they're tired. The morally wrong thing to do is to say, sorry, you're the wrong color, you got to stand in the back. So the thing that was morally wrong was the law, not her behavior. So in that case, conformity isn't always good. And by the same token, deviance isn't always a bad thing. And Rosa Parks is an example of that. If conformity isn't good, then deviance in that case would be bad. So again, it's too simplistic to say to a 3-year-old, although that's all they can really handle at that point maybe, is people who break the rules, they're the bad guys. People who follow the rules, they're the good guys. And functionalism, in a way, at its most simplistic, says that. The laws are good things that societies have created. And when people violate them, they're violating the harmony of their society and going against the solidarity of the society. But a more complicated functionalist agrees with me and says, laws aren't that simple. People don't always agree, and there's different levels of power in society, and just because things are written down doesn't always mean that everybody in the society agrees on them. And so in the case of the Southern white South, the people in power wanted the law that way, but not everybody in the South agreed with those laws. And so if you disagreed with them, you felt the need to violate them. The founding of our country wouldn't have happened without rebellious founding fathers that wanted to violate the rules of England. So just because the people in power say something is how it's supposed to be, doesn't mean everyone agrees with that. So there are negative sides to conformity. That raises the issue of the positive functions of deviance. We haven't talked really about functions yet, and that term is the heart of the functionalist perspective. If we can begin to understand what they mean by functions, we'll understand functionalism a little better. But that's also maybe the source of functionalism's simplicity, is if you assume that everything exists because it performs a function, then you're just sort of assuming everything has a reason. I don't know, have you ever heard people say that phrase, everything happens for a reason? I hate that phrase. I always want to punch whoever says that. Because some things don't happen for any good reason. Or sometimes they happen because it helps one person but not another. And so just because something exists in society doesn't mean it should. And functionalists have a tendency to try to always explain things that way. Well, if we're doing this, we must need to be doing it this way. So let's figure out the need that we must be fulfilling by doing it this way. And that's maybe not always the best way to ask the question. Maybe we should ask, maybe it's not doing a good thing. But let's ask this. Deviance does exist in our society, and it would be hard to imagine a society that there was no deviance. And could you imagine one? Imagine a society where everybody followed all the rules all the time. Would that be a good place to live? No? You say no? You're guessing that's where I'm going with this. It's a good guess, but why? Why would that not be a good society? If we're thinking about the positive functions of deviance, we're beginning to think about why breaking the rules is sometimes a good thing to have happen. It helps the society. Can you think of examples? In other words, what would we lack if we had a society where everybody was always obeying all the rules all the time?
I think people would lack a sort of humanity, and it's really important to people, especially like us as a species, to draw our lines where we say, no, like anybody below a certain age is not allowed to engage in like sexual activity or...
Well, I understand why we make rules. That's what we were just talking about.
Yeah, but I think deviance is the question of trying to push those and see where the true line actually is.
Okay, so if nobody ever broke the rules, we wouldn't know where the line is. What you're saying then is it helps to reinforce social solidarity, in fact. When a group makes a rule, when we say something like, hey, we're all supposed to sit where we're sitting right now. What happens if somebody violates it? What happens if you decided, hey, I'm going to sit on that side of the room next time. I'm not going to sit against this wall. I'm going to sit against that wall. And you're saying it would test the boundaries. So maybe that's a bad example. But Durkheim, the founding father of functionalism, said the real reason we punish people is not about that person that broke the rule. The real reason we punish people is for everybody else. So for example, when somebody gets hung in the town square, and in the old days in traditional society, they generally punished people in public. So they would have a big hanging in the town square. And Durkheim said, it's not about that guy. That guy's going to be dead, and so it's really not about him. It's really about reinforcing to the rest of the people, hey, we really hate murderers, and we hate the act of murder. So when we see this guy being punished in the town square, it's really a message to the rest of us, hey, we're the good people. We're the people who didn't murder anyone. We're the people who get to watch the execution. We're not the one being executed. And so it's really helps create a sense of solidarity on the part of the people who aren't being punished, that, hey, we're the good people. We can link arms. And that was really the purpose of these public executions, was for the whole town to come out and watch and feel connected to each other by watching this person get killed for doing something that the group disapproved of. Now, we nowadays don't have a lot of public punishment, but are there other ways that we kind of use the deviant people as examples that can remind the rest of us that, hey, we really care about X or Y or Z, and that's why we're holding this person up? Can you think of ways we do that nowadays?
Would it be like community service or like?
Maybe. I think sometimes the reason they have them do the community service on the freeway is so everyone will see them. And if you're out there in your orange jumpsuit and you're picking up trash, it's a bit of do you know who Kelsey Grammer is? The guy who played, remember that show? What? Frasier, that was his name. And he was on Cheers. Anyway, this guy, Kelsey Grammer, I once met him at a bar, and he was had just been in the paper because he got caught for doing drugs, and they had him picking up trash on the freeway. Anyway, I said, he said, I know every inch of that freeway now. Anyway, but so there he was, a famous celebrity, and that was how they punished him. So you might be right about that. Court TV is another example. We tend to have a lot of court cases and things on TV. Anyway, well, think this through, because I'm going to ask this question again, and I remind you participation is important. This shouldn't be that hard of a question to answer again. What are some reasons why we like deviants like Rosa Parks, or the Founding Fathers, or the hippies, or people who wear tattoos even when they're not supposed to, or Donald Trump, people like him? He's a deviant in many ways. What is it about deviants that we think are positive for our society?